The nights after the dead were driven back were not gentle. They were long and clean of moon, and the wind along the wall carried a taste of iron, as if an unseen smith beat the ridge with his hammer, and every blow rang down the 7 kingdoms. Jon Snow rode under those winds with Ghost running light as breath ahead of him and Tormund Giantsbane singing some tuneless thing about sausages behind. And the wall itself, the great blue-white slab thrown up by hands long dead, groaned at him as a house groans in frost. It was not a sound he knew it could make. It turned in the marrow and made his teeth ache. By the time they came to Castle Black, the ice had shifted and cracked like old bones. Runnels ran down the face of the wall where no thaw should be, thin serpents of water that steamed before the air ate them. A raven watched Jon from a broken merlin, head cocked. Beyond it, north, the sky bruised darkened and blew a shifting silver that moved like fish just underwater. "Looks like your old mistress forgot her cloak," Tormund said, tilting his head to the wall. "Queen Mother Winters left her shoulders bare. The wall won't keep out a good cough, let alone shadows." "The dead are gone," Jon said, though he didn't know it, not truly. The great shadow he had fought had cracked like glass beneath steel as hot as dragon breath, and all that followed it had fallen. But the world had not loosened. If anything, the cold had become more exact, as if the storm had left a question and the air required an answer. The men they found at Castle Black wore their beards rimed white, as if each breath they exhaled were a web that froze over them. They met Jon with a relief too naked to be pride. They were few. The watch had always been few. "Storm came down the wall 3 nights ago," said the acting steward, a square, scarred man from White Harbor whose name Jon could not pull from memory. "No cloud to it, no snow, just wind and a noise. Eastwatch's breach runs deeper. Everything we sealed is cracked." The black gate spoke. Jon turned his head as if he might see it from the courtyard, the night fort south of them where the old roots ran, where a face carved into a weirwood lived on in ice and dark and demanded oaths. What did it say? Nothing we understood. A murmur, tiredness, begging, some said. Ghost came back and put his head against Jon's hand, and Jon found the wolf shaking. Not hard, just enough that Jon felt the tremor travel up his arm. Ghost did not shake. A day later a raven came out of a clean blue noon, and out of it fell a small boy wrapped in fur, half frozen, hair stuck to his cheeks, eyes all whites. He could not speak until the maester. There was no maester now, only a thin man from the shadow of the Shadow Tower who knew potions and letters enough for records. Forced warm wine into him, and even then the words fell in pieces like shale. "Shadows with no feet," the boy whispered. "They come through the stone. They don't break the snow. They go for your breath." "A boy's fear," Tormund said, but he said it too loudly. Jon wrote a letter by firelight and sent the raven south. He wrote Sansa, and he used blunt words because the north required bluntness now. "The wall is cracking. The old magics are failing. If there are any new magics in the south, send them north." He wrote to Samwell, whatever Sam was now, fat boy no more. Sam, who had a way of making truth sound like apology even when he held a sword in his hand. "Bring books. Bring names of old things. Bring anything that says how the wall was made. Anything that says how it stands. Bring the truth of the Night King, if there is any truth that is not fear." The ravens took the words and were made small by the sky, and when the last wing beat was gone and the words traveled alone, Jon felt empty. He had never liked the wall, even when it was all he had, and he realized now he had never trusted it. He had trusted the men who stood on it. The wall was a monument, and monuments broke. That night the noise came again, a grinding under the stone, a deep cold moan. Men woke with ice in their beards where there had been none the moment before. The brazier's coal turned white at the rim and then black again, as if something had sipped at the heat and put it back undecided. Jon went up the steps with a torch in his hand and Ghost's fur brushing his leg like a firelight rain. The air ate the torch to a dark red muscle he held close to his chest, meant for a boy lost in the woods, not a man on a wall. Out on the ice, half a mile from the face, a shape came up like a thought made visible. A hill that was not a hill, something moving inside something that did not bend, as if a man walked beneath a frozen lake. "Do you see that?" he asked Tormund, who joined him with his hood thrown back as if to catch snow in his hair. "I see a thing I would rather not. How many men do you have? 12? 20? Send them all. I will fetch the rest. And bring me fire that burns better than wood." They made fire the old way and the new. Pitch and oil and winter-dry pine cones and dragonglass under it. The shards that took a coal and glowed deep and painted the world a low, awful red. They burned far into the night, and neither the wind nor the advancing curl of nothingness stopped. It was not the dead. The dead had been a parade of wrong blood going the wrong way. This was emptiness coming to sip. When it reached the first pit of fire, the flame bowed to it, elongated like a man before a king, and then became a stalk of dark that broke with a sound like hair pulled in a fist. "The wall is leaking," Tormund said, none of his old laughter anywhere in him. "Whatever's on that side is not meant to know about us." "What's on that side?" Jon said. Tormund spat milk-white onto ice. "A sky that won't stop. A cold that never thinks of a hearth. By morning, when the last of the fires were sullen mow. Endias of wet black, and the men chattered like teeth. The thing had receded as if it had made a taste and was full. Jon sat with a cup of something that pretended to be tea and listened to the wall. It breathed, slow and shallow like an old man sleeping. 2 days later Sansa came north like a blade, wrapped in a white that wasn't to hide against the snow. It was a decision, a refusal to take color from any flag. She dismounted stiffly and put her gloved hand on Jon's shoulder, and for the space of a breath, he was the boy she had laughed at and loved and struck and forgiven. "Your letter was not the kind a sister wants," she said, "but I have known worse words on worse nights." "East Watch?" he asked. "Men on the way, stones, woodsmen. We will build whatever you require. And Samwell wrote me from Old Town. He is on the road with the part of the library he convinced the Archmasters they'd not miss. He says he thinks he knows what the wall is and what it was meant to be." "What does he think?" Jon asked, and felt himself disappointing at how hopeful he sounded. "That it is less a wall than a lock," Sansa said, "and less a lock than a vow. The stones do not keep so much as remember not to yield. But vows, we have seen vows. Men forget them. Old things sleep under them. The question is who made the vow." They were quiet together, and there was room in the quiet even for a little warmth. Ghost watched Sansa with the same steady regard he had given a rainstorm once. Tormund arrived with a roast something on a spit, and men ate standing with their bowls against their chests and their faces steam-flushed and fierce. In the night Sansa asked him if he felt it. Not the wind, the other thing, the second cold. "I feel something," Jon said. "I have since the dead were burned. It was louder tonight. It is a place in the air where the air is not, a gap that aches." "I think we put too much hope in steel and fire," Sansa said. "We like the noise of it. We forget the quiet things. The old gods never were noisy." "Bran would know," Jon said. Sansa's face became a closed window. "He is not easy to find, but ravens watch Winterfell more than they have any right to. If I were a girl, I would think our minds are a hall he passes through. Bran found them that same night. It was not his body, but it was him. Ravens came like black snow and settled along the merlons and on the heads of spears and even on Ghost's back where he permitted it as if he knew. The birds moved, a flutter of feathers and a noise that was not a noise, and then the raven's eyes were a single eye, and Jon was looking into it. He wanted to call him brother and could not. The air between them did not accept that word. "You were standing on a story," Bran's voice said, and Jon had the old time ache he had had as a boy when in his mind he reached up and could not touch a thing. "You are standing on a vow that requires a living thing to breathe it. For as long as it breathed, the vow stood. It was broken. It broke itself." "What do you mean, broke itself?" Jon said aloud, and the ravens moved their heads like an audience. "The thing that breathed it forgot its name," Bran said. "It became winter. What remembers when it forgets is hunger. The vow held, but it held for the wrong thing. And you want to put a new thing in its place," Sansa said. "You want to put my brother in the hole where the old one fell." "I do not want anything," Bran said, and all the birds turned their heads the other way. "I see, Etel. The wall was never going to last forever on a breath that lost its lips. When the wind came, that was not the dead. It was the hole where a name should have been. "The Night King," Tormund said, and his mouth tasted the words as if they were green fruit and might be sour or sweet. "You want a Night King of our own." The piece of the notion that struck Jon like a glove was how calmly Tormund said "our own." This man who had hated walls and kings more than he had hated any one man could say it and mean safety. "I want the land to remember the right thing again," Sansa said. "If the wall is a gate's memory, it should remember a gate that shuts when we tell it to and opens when it must. If the old name was lost, perhaps a new name can be set there that does not forget kindness mean weakness." A raven left the parapet and landed on the spear but by Jon's shoulder. Ghost put his head under Jon's hand as if to weigh the choice before Jon made it. Sam came into the snow 2 days after that, wrapped like a beached whale in furs and leather, angry at everyone and everything and delighted by the fact, as if it proved he still belonged to himself. He brought books that smelled of old mold and sea and beeswax. He carried a knife of dragonglass and used it to sharpen a quill. He wrote on some pages and tore them off and burned them. He talked to Jon until Jon could hear the words in his sleep. "Listen," Sam said, as if Jon were a boy who had ignored his schooling too long. "The wall was a work of binding, and everything we thought was stone is also a shape laid over a promise. The children set the bones, the first men carried the stones, and the thing that made it hold was the word. Not just saying a word that lived inside a person and taught the world to be what the word said." "You think it was a person?" Jon said. "I think it was more complicated than a person, but it was a person first. It had to be. Blood learns first and stone learns after." Sam tapped a page with a thumb that had a burn on the pad. "There are names for it. Hingelord, Keeper, the Unclosed, the Watch that Breathes, the Winter King. And there is an old northern tale of a man who married a cold bride. It is all the same story turned to look at itself by different fires. The first kept the wall closed with his body and his name. He lived a long time. He lived too long. He forgo." "Ty, how do you know he forgot?" Sansa asked. "Everything that followed makes more sense if he did," Sam said softly. "If he remembered, it was malice. If he forgot, it was hunger wearing a once-beloved face." Jon took that word and turned it around. Hunger had many faces. He had worn hunger. It had worn him. "If the wall needs a name," Sansa said, "what name does it want?" Sam looked at Jon with a kind of confident misery only Sam could make gentle. "It wants a name that can hold both fire and frost without breaking. It wants a name that remembers why doors exist." They went to Night Fort. They went at dusk because Sam said dusk is when both day and night can hear you and neither will be jealous. The Night Fort had not grown better. It held on to its old stories like bones hold last meat. The Black Gate was where it had always been, under the earth, in the damp, on the far side of a narrow passage that forced the shoulders to turn. They brought no torches. Sam told them light would be frowned upon because it tells the old laws that you do not trust them. They took warmth in their sleeves and blood. Jon could hear the wall again. In the guts of it, the sound was larger and more human. It sounded like a sleeper in a bad dream. The face in the weirwood was the same sad mucus white it had always been. Its eyes were 2 holes the color of slow water. The mouth moved before the sound came. It was like watching a thing think its way through a word. "Who comes?" it asked, and Jon heard it both as a voice and as the breath by his ear, and as the frost in his throat that made the word from inside. "Men of the Night's Watch," said the acting steward, whose name Jon still could not hold, and he fell into the old oath. But he did not finish because the face sighed and the sound blew all the words apart, as if a dandelion had been "who comes" and an old mouth had blown it into seeds. "No," said the face kindly. "We have heard that promise enough. We have heard it poorly. Who comes?" Jon stepped forward without deciding to, and Ghost pressed flank to his leg as a brace in case the earth tilted. "Jon Snow comes." The mouth of the tree smiled. "That is a name that is not simple. Why do you come?" "I come because the wall is a door, and because the door is forgetting to be closed." "And do you know why?" asked the face. "Because the one who held it forgot his name." The mouth turned down a little, not displeasure, only gravity. We cannot be angry at forgetting. There is too much that can be asked of a mind. We can only be angry at refusing. Sam made a small noise. John looked at him. Sam shook his head once. Let the tree speak its own niceness, his eyes said. We cannot promise men will behave like that. The face sighed again and the air became all breath. You want a new name, the weirwood said. You want a name that can keep the door in good order. Yes, John said. He did not look at Sansa or Tormund or the acting steward or the two freemen who had come to stand in the old place where they were never allowed. What will you pay? The face asked. What did the first pay? John asked, not buying time, not even curious. He needed the measure. He paid everything, said the tree, and with all the care in the world, with sorrow and admiration both. And after a long while he paid more, because the first payment had made it easy to forget his debt. I will pay everything, John said, and there was no good dramatic hush after it, no intake like a hall. There was only Sansa whispering something he did not catch and Sam making a careful, small objection that stopped itself. Tormund cursed under his breath, as if he wanted to break the first answer like a dish and force it into smaller, less adequate pieces. The eyes of the face slicked, and suddenly there were tears in them like sap. That is a hard word. Do you know how long everything is? As long as it must be, John said, because this was not a court where you made yourself look clever. The truth was not clever. It was clean and it hurt. The mouth smiled at him like a mother. Then you will need a body that can hold hot and cold together without breaking. You will need a name that is both iron and hush. You will need a beast to watch your feet and a bird to watch your head. Do you have these? Ghost leaned into him. John closed his eyes, and when he opened them he had the feeling of a wing passing overhead, and for a moment he hated it. On the wind above, at the far edge of he could not say where, he felt a raven's eye open and look down. Why me? He asked, not because he wanted to be told he was special, because he wanted the universe to say it had some arithmetic and he fitted some. Because you were killed and walked the rest of the way anyway, said the tree. You have owed the world since and paid as you went. You are a fair customer. Because your blood knows both winter's dark bed and summer's terrible noon and refuses to be charred or frozen without permission. Because your heart has no room to be crowned, and so it can hold a crown and not wear it like a king. Because your name is a simple lie told so long it became true. Do you resent that? John smiled. Some days, most days, he had learned to love the lie like a scar. He could touch it when a day needed proving to be real. Then kneel, said the face, and John did, and the floor was wet and cold and not unfriendly. It was like kneeling on the belly of a sleeping horse, all patient strength and slow breath. Do you swear? The face asked, and John did not repeat the words he had learned as a boy in his black. He promised, in the simple terms of sleeping and waking, that while he breathed the door would know when to be shut and when to be opened for the living things that had the right to pass. He promised the door would never open for hunger, even when hunger wore a father's face or a lover's smile. He promised the door would listen to names. He promised not to keep what had no right to be kept. Does the door open for the free folk? He asked. Always, he would have it always for them, but it could not be always. That was not how doors worked. When they come as guests, yes, said the tree. When they come as a storm that names itself guest, no. You will judge. I will breathe, the face said. Judgment is for those who own land. I keep a border of nothing. Can he see us? Sansa asked. She had not moved from the archway, but she came forward now. One palm on the slick stone and the other held low, case for a knife and mercy both. He will hear you more than see you, said the face. If you put your hand on the wall, he will know whether it is clean. If you press your ear to it, he will smell your hair. If you speak, you will feel foolish, but he will take the meaning and keep it in a good place. Do you ask something else? I ask if there is a way to go to him later, Sansa said. Not to unmake, to speak. You can bring him the names of your children and they will sit with him like small fires, said the tree. You can bring him old songs and he will not know the tune, but he will taste the bread they came from. You can bring him the smell of your hair and, if he is ever near forgetting himself, it will put his face back on. There is a little cruelty in every promise. Sansa took it. "Thank you," she said. "What must be done?" Jon asked. The face's mouth opened and something came out. It was not a thing. It was not light. Jon would have called it a word that a man held with both hands. It was a crown of frost that did not gleam. It swallowed gleam. It looked soft as sunlight on morning snow and as sharp as moonlight on a knife. Sam made a caught breath. Tormund muttered. Ghost watched it with a soldier's patience. "Put it on," said the face, "and do not think of yourself. Do not think of your loves. Think of the path you walked in snow. Think of the breath you saw that proved you were alive. Think of the hand you put on the ice when you were a boy and the way it burned without fire. Think of your father's hand when it left yours and you learned he was gone. Think of the time you took a knife and were given back without a name. That will be the knot. Tie it." Jon took the crown, and it was so cold it was not there. He did not put it on his head. He put it over his heart and pressed, and it slid in without pain. He felt it sit itself in his blood, as if blood were a chair prepared for a guest. Ghost whined once and then stopped because Ghost was brave and had decided nothing here would be grief if watched properly. He stood. He was not taller. He was not shorter. He did not know more. He was not a god. He was what he had been, with the addition that it was now difficult to tell where the air ended. When he breathed, the world remembered something it had wanted to forget. That there was a season between autumn and darkness, and it had rules. Sansa's gloved hand covered his. For a moment Jon thought the glove was a soft frost. She looked at his face as if she might not get another chance and might also be able to memorize enough for a lifetime. "Do you feel strange?" she asked, the question itself flinching from the poor small sound it made. "I feel cold where it matters," Jon said. He worried for her and for the men out in the yard and for Tormund and every laughing woman who had ever leaned from a free-folk tent to pour something hot into a friend's hand. He worried for the small stubborn lights of the world. It was a useful worry. It organized his breath. Bran spoke again, out of no raven this time, out of the air like a crack in clear ice, a voice down a long, clean tunnel. "You need to seal the breach, or the breach will find a thought to live in and make itself a king. Go now." They went up into a sky that had drawn over as if every cloud had turned shy and hid together and made a single animal. The world had become close and fine, the way a child's shirt feels after it is ironed to please someone visiting. Jon walked to the edge of the wall and put his hand on the stone and could not say he was touching stone. The wall was touching him back. The thing in the far ice had come again. It was taller. It moved like nothing except itself. It slid forward as if pushed by a hand too tender to be called force. Men were ready with fire and orders and fear. Jon stepped past them and onto the ice stairs and down, and every step he took, the noise of the wall turned softer in his ears until it was only inside his chest. A slow tick. "Don't die where I can see you," Tormund said behind him, which was Tormund's way to say, "Don't die at all," because he would break anything that dared show him the death of a friend. "You can't follow me," Jon said without turning. "I don't know how far I go or how long or if I come back to the same place. Watch the men. If anyone runs when they should stand, laugh at him until he is too angry to flee." Tormund spat and then he said, "I was going to do that anyway." And Jon forgave him his feelings. Ghost came to the top of the stair and stopped and whined low, and Jon felt a tug in his chest as if a hand made of white breath had taken hold of him. He left the last stair and walked out onto the flat between wall and nothing. The air here was not like other air. It had fewer rooms in it and more knives. Jon breathed and felt it walk into him and sit. It was cold. He was colder. They met and decided not to fight. He did not raise a hand. He did not take a sword. He put the heel of his hand on the ice and thought of the kneeling he had done, and he remembered every step he had taken as a boy in the snow that made him smile. He remembered his father's eyes, who had been his father and his judge, and the door he had walked through to become. He remembered a woman's hand in the snow and a cry and a sword, and a name whispered like a poor thing given a rich room. He remembered the knife in his belly and the breath that had held the other end of it and the long salt of it and the way he had looked at sky when there had been no sky. Then he thought of a door he had chosen to close behind him. Then he thought of Open. He braided them and laid the braid on the ground as if straw for a horse. The thing the air was doing paused. John pushed the breath out of him in a long, contented sigh, as if for a moment he were a man finally allowed to lie down. The air agreed. It fell against the wall like a tired lover. For a moment, absolutely quiet. Then the sound came up through the ice, a deep, slow crack, and the crack healed itself the way skin closes over a small cut when a man is young. The wind went back to being wind. The cold went back to being cold. The extra was gone. John did not fall. He did not swoon. He stood, and the ground beneath his boots had a sense of being done. He wanted to be near stone. He wanted to be in water. He wanted to be air. He wanted. It almost frightened him. Ghost howled from the stairtop, a long white sound that tied all the men together on the wall and made them straight-backed and foolish in a way that keeps people alive longer than they have any right. Sansa was beside him suddenly with the impossible politics of a little sister who dislikes being told not to do a thing and therefore finds a way to do it. She touched his sleeve, and he thought it might be the last time he felt cloth on his arm. He kissed her forehead. She was cold, and he warmed her for that moment and knew it would be harder to warm her hereafter. "Tell me," she said, almost not sound at all. "Tell you what? Tell me how." He lifted his eyes to the wall, and it looked back at him like a thing that had never been a thing, a dawn that had become a statue and had just remembered it could move. "I breathe," he said. "The wall breathes. We must never be out of step." He swallowed. He had a fancy the swallow echoed up the face of the ice. "When you stand here and you think of me, think of breathing." That night, the wall sang. Men he would never meet again swore afterward that they had heard a song but could not sing it back. In Winterfell, a hearth burned with a hotter, cleaner blue, and no one added wood to it for days. In the Godswood, a leaf clung longer than it should and then let go, not with a clap but with a sigh like torn silk. In Old Town, a young acolyte woke from a dream wherein he had been a bird and a man and a door, and he wrote down every part of it and never showed anyone because some truths do not know what they are until they are kept private for years. John took the high room in the Lord Commander's tower for that first night, even though he drew breath now out of everywhere and nowhere and did not require sleep. He wanted a human room. Sansa sat with him and put her knees to the brazier, and they talked about food because neither could bear to talk about what was happening to John's bones and eyes. "Do you remember the bread from the baker on the alley behind the rookery?" Sansa asked. "He made little rolls with honey and flakes of salt. I have not asked for them since the last time we were children." "I remember them," John said, and his mouth watered and he tasted ash with the water because ash lives wherever men have needed to be warm. "I remember stealing too, and you saw me and you stepped on my toe and I dropped them and you picked them up and gave me the smaller one and pretended it had always been mine." Sansa looked at the brazier and smiled with a kind of wistfulness that was almost cruel. "I did that? What a thing to do." "It made sense," John said, and they sat and did not talk about vows or doors or names men keep in their chests in place of a heart because the heart must go elsewhere now. In the morning, Sam put his hand against the wall and looked at John and pushed his spectacles up the bridge of his nose, though the spectacles had not moved and would not. "It feels kept," he said, "like a pantry put in order by a woman who has exact ideas about onions. Everything is where it ought to be." "You take care with your smell," John said, and Sam laughed and cried at once because that was the sound of going away. Tormund did not cry. Tormund said, "If you become a Frost King, I will build you a chair out of bare bones and come north and sit in it while you tell me lies about how easy it is to be cold." John clapped him on the shoulder. "Build it high and make it uncomfortable or I will get soft." "You will call," Tormund said, and then cursed because it sounded like a woman in the door of a tent asking a man to remember her after a raid. "If you need us, if the cold, if it gets teeth again, I will open the door when fire needs air," John said, because he had learned already that saying yes to a friend was not the same as saying the word yes. After Sansa returned to Winterfell with men who sang without the nerve to admit they sang. After Sam wrote letters in a fever because knowledge makes a man want to have everything it touches. After Tormund took his people north like a shepherd with more wolves than sheep and a love for both, John began the long breath. He was a man in a bed, and he was a slow lung in a mountain, and he was the noise ice makes under a hawk's shadow. He was the hand that never lifted and the door that never stopped thinking of hinges. Seasons turned because the world had to keep some habits. The spring that followed was cold as a maiden's barefoot and short as a kiss given to a brother going to war. The summer that came after it was long in the south, hot as a joke that goes too far, and the small folk sang, and they said they did not need kings and they meant it less than they thought. The north kept its coat on and did not complain. The crops came up knobby and determined. Men married and and did not forget to be stubborn. That stubbornness saved babies, though no one ever wrote a song for it. In the second winter past the ceiling, a curtain of white things came out of the far north and stood at the place where the wall, now less a wall than a breath held in perfect discipline, slid into the sea. They were not the dead and they were not the shadows. They were the hunger that the weirwood had named, given patience. They stood for 7 days and did not move and made men at Eastwatch forget their names, and then their children's names, and then the shape of their faces. John breathed and the forgetting lifted like fog and the hunger sighed and slid away. And the men sat down and learned their names like boys at a school. One of them wept because he had learned that his name was not one he had liked, and yet it suited him. By the 5th year, the stories had begun. A free folk girl told of a pale man seen walking across a field of half-frozen streams without breaking a single skin of ice, and how every hare in the field came up to him and did not run. A linen merchant's son wrote a song about a white wolf who watched him from the top of the wall through 6 days, and then a week, and then one clean morning leaped for joy, and its breath made a halting aurora. Sansa told no stories except to children. Her children, if they came and if the songs are true, heard their names sit in the air before the wall like birds. They had wanted to see their uncle like a man wants, but when they pressed their faces to the ice and closed their eyes, they felt as if they were looking down a well and saw their own faces made braver. It satisfied them. It hurt them. Both were true. They told no one. They were raised to understand there is power in a kept secret. Lords who had loved the South for its comfort forgot the taste of northern things and began to send sullen letters suggesting that, perhaps, the wall was an old story and should be knocked down, or at least trimmed to a fashionable height. No one answered those letters. The men who wrote them learned to be embarrassed later when a winter as clear and sharp as a new knife came down and people told the old stories to their children between teeth clacked tight. The embarrassment saved some of them from being killed by the cold. You do not die quickly if pride keeps you moving from hearth to seek witness. Bran came sometimes and spoke, and when he spoke the ravens arranged themselves around the words like beads. He told Jon things he already knew, and because of that Jon loved him. He told Jon things Jon could not feel, like that the warm sea would rise in a place where men built a temple to a god who ate only music, and Jon felt a small sadness for the music. Bran told Sansa things she did not ask for, and she learned how to nod to a future without giving it her entire respect. Lord Commander of Nothing, the men called Jon to his face to see if he would smile, and sometimes he was kind to them and did. He walked the wall and did not leave footprints. Once he walked south to the Night Fort and stood in the Black Gate again, and the face did not speak. A knot does not ask after its own tying. He went to a small place just north of Winterfell where a tree remembered the way a woman had once labored, and he put his hand on that earth and felt the shape of a mother's cry move up into his chest and loosen something that had been too tight. Later he could not take his hand away for a long time, and Ghost leaned upon his hip and waited the waiting of a creature that has time. Men tried to crown him. They made a circlet of thin silver twisted like ribs and brought it up the steps with the shyness of people trying to be good somewhere they knew goodness was heavy. Jon thanked them and left the circlet on the stones of the parapet, and later the snow covered it, and later a rook found it and took it for his nest, and the rook's chicks were beautiful and greedy. They fledged and shook it from the nest, and a young watchman picked it up and gave it to a girl when spring came and no one had to be cold for a month. A boy named Jaren, with hair the color of a burnt oatcake, slipped through a gap in orders and set his feet for the north. He had sat under a table in the hall and heard men speak of wonders, and he wanted a handful. He went beyond the gate in summer when the world was green as a glass bottle, and he walked out into a land no man had had much right to call home, and found a woman of the free folk who pressed him into her tent and fed him stew with dried apple and wildly shook him by the shoulders and turned him around and sent him back in a circle to the wall. In the middle of the circle, he came upon a field of ice that would not melt, though the air was soft around it. In the middle of the middle, he saw a figure like a man standing very still and thought it a dream because he was hot and too full of stew and his boots were not broken in right. He went home and did not tell anyone because sometimes a boy knows when a story will not be believed. Sansa grew older and it did not make her smaller. She became a house with many rooms, most of which she did not allow visitors in. In one of the rooms, she kept a little book of things children had said to her that sounded like poetry or prophecy or pure nonsense. She wrote down, "Today the snow tried to eat my face, but it turned out that the snow was a girl and she hugged me instead." She wrote, "I think Uncle John is a breath a big god forgot to inhale." She wrote, without showing anyone and without pronouncing them aloud to try them on the air, "When I die, if there is a door, it will be a good door, because finally I will understand why a door must sometimes close." On a late winter afternoon when the sky took on the color of good steel, and the cold was the kind that makes men honest by making speech a kind of violence, Sansa went to the top of the wall and put her hands flat to it. Her gloves were off. The burn was immediate and important. Felt like a bride price. She thought of how boys talk about scars and laughed. And the laugh moved along the ice like a rumor that had been with the family for 3 generations. She thought, "I am here, and I am holding myself together with every ribbon I have, and every tenet and every plan." She thought the names of people she had promised to protect. She began to recite them as if they were beads on a cord, and the air around her warmed in small, polite ways. When she ran out of names, she told the wall about small things, petty things, the particular way a certain guard's nose dripped, and the way certain lords held their wine like a weapon, and the way in spring a certain gate stuck and you had to lift before you pulled. She said, "Do you hear me? I am speaking as if to a bed-bound husband in a good marriage." The ice under her palms did not answer, and then it sighed. Almost nothing, almost not real. And she wept into the cold and learned another price. The free folk told stories among themselves. In one, the White King walked north, not south, beyond places even the old grandmothers would not whisper of because whispers do not carry that far. He went to a cliff that fell into a pale sea that offered its body to the sky like a bride pretending to faint, and he put his hand out and he made the sea forget to eat the shore for a while. It was a kindness to some birds. In another, he visited a hollow where the last dreams of bears went, and he sat and counted them by the slow lift of his head and agreed with the bears that men were silly. In many, he was followed by a white wolf who grinned, and the grin was not sneer or threat or even humor. It was simile for a good rope tied at the right time around the right thing. No man sang about the women who kept fire at the Shadow Tower Strait for years and years, and how their hands smelled of tallow and onion and their eyes grew red and dear at the edges. But the stories of Jon's quiet filled in around their lives like mortar. They took the breath he sent them and made food and a little happiness. They did not ask for much. They were stern and they endured and made their jokes in their own way, and their lovers took the measure of their endurance and became kinder without knowing why. There were nights when the cold tried to name itself king again. It would stand out beyond the wall and call itself by all its old titles and bring witnesses in the form of dead air and ice too brittle to be natural and the sound of glass. Jon would lift his breath and speak in silence, and the cold would remember that a door is a contract, not a declaration. It would slink to its stool like a dog who loves its master too much to misbehave under his eye and waits to knock the meat off the table when he is gone. Only he did not leave the room. He did not even blink. Once, a thing came out of the north that was not cold. It was warm and it dragged heat like a chain. It had a color no one could agree on when they tried to recall it later. It stopped before the wall and sort of bent like a man deciding between 2 lies. Some said it was summer that had escaped its leash. Some said it was God grown bold. Some said it was a mistake. Jon breathed in and his breath hit it, and it made a sound like the first note of a song when only the mouth has formed it and not the throat. The thing softened then and turned into rain, and it rained for 4 days, and the ground drank and flags on poles hung smiling. Men said that was the first and only time they saw rain at the wall. It walked off into the sea afterward and made the sea speak too loudly for a while, but no one drowned who had not meant to. Years bent. Sam grew old and still wrote, and that writing became the way boys were taught to think and the way men learned to apologize to their wives. He wrote, The wall is a breath and we are the teeth to shape it. He wrote, "The Night King we now have is a night in which a mother can walk from her bed to her sick boy and back without being taken by fear." He wrote it badly and well, and it did the world more good than the songs, which were prettier and less useful. He died with a pen in his hand and ink on his lip and a small smile because he had managed to tell a truth without scaring anyone too much. He was put in the ground with no stones. Ghost came in the night and pushed at the mound with his muzzle, and then lay down beside it and slept. No one said anything because that is the way a good thing is to be watched. Bran came and came until he did not. The last time he found Jon, he did not bring any birds. He spoke as if lazy, as if his mouth could not be troubled to do more than let the words fall out. He said he was going. Jon asked him not where. The answer would only suggest Jon had a map, and he did not. "If you see Mother," Jon said, meaning the mother he had known and then the mother he had not, and the mothers he had seen in their seasons and the mother the house had made out of cold and hunger. "Tell them I held the door." Bran smiled a little. "You held the door very well. That was all." It was more than enough. One midsummer, a child from Deepwood Motte, a girl with hair white as uncooked dough and eyes the color of slate in rain, came to the wall with her father to see it. Since this was the sort of thing people had started to do now that new summers came reliably enough to plan around, she walked up the stairs with the stamping boldness of a child who has never been told her legs should be less than a boy's. At the top she pressed her ear to the ice and frowned, and her father laughed and told her she was being foolish but watched her with a hope he had not admitted to himself because sometimes parents are allowed a little myth. She listened longer than most, and then she made a face like a girl given a seat at a grand table and finding only onions. "I don't hear anything," she said to Jon, who stood there like a gentleman ghost and had learned how to keep company without breaking a mind. It had taken practice. It had broken some minds. "I thought I would hear an ocean, or horses stamping." "What do you hear when you sleep?" Jon asked. She thought. "I hear the sound that happens when you turn the page of a book and the page is clean and big and has a picture you don't know yet." "That," Jon said, and the words felt kind to say, "is the right answer." She looked up at him without fear or reverence, and this pleased him more than the years of songs. "Are you lonely?" she asked. "No," he said. It was true the way a cold apple is true. "I do not get bored. I watch. It is sometimes quiet. That is different." "You must be cold, though," she said, and he did not think she meant it literally, or rather she did, and she meant something else too. The way a child holds more than one truth in her small hands and does not drop either. "Yes." He stood, a man in a very large room, and he smiled at her and she walked away, and later she told her mother she had met the Night King, and her mother said do not say that, and her father said let her say what she likes. Words change, that is why they persist. In the last days of Sansa's life, when age and habit and 100 solved dilemmas lay like careful stones around her, and she had learned to be proud of how many she had not solved without ruin, she went to the wall as if to a pantry to choose a jar of jam she had hidden from the children. She climbed slowly and she took the steps one at a time, and her hair was white and she had put it up the way a girl might because girls are allowed crowns out of habit, too. At the top she put both palms on the ice and her hands did not hurt as much as she remembered because hurt changes and the mind adapts. She told the wall a story about a small boy who had stolen bread and a small girl who had forced him to share. She told the wall about a summer when everything went wrong and it turned out that the wrong was the only ladder across the gap. She told the wall a few things that were none of your business and partly her own. She leaned her forehead to it and breathed, and what she breathed out came back into her like a little brandy. She laughed, because always the cold makes a woman honest. "Brother," she said, and did not demand an answer and did not expect a miracle. "What a world!" The sigh that came up out of the ice then was not for effect. It was a simple acknowledgement. The air around her softened. Not much, enough to be noticed if a person was looking, and that was all that mattered. She stayed like that for a long time, and then she sat on the bench and wrapped her coat around her ankles and looked at nothing the way some women do very well. She slept, and in the morning she did not wake, and it was a good place for that. Men said the wall said goodbye to her, and men say many things, but those who had been there and had had their ears on the ice said it was quieter for a time afterward, as if a room in the house had been shut but flowers had been left in it for one more day. There were days when John thought of heat. He did not think of fire like men think of fire. He thought of the way a hand feels when it does what it wants. He thought of muscles moving smoothly without any pain, just the right exertion. He thought of a colt's breath in winter and a man laughing with his mouth closed. He thought of loaves. He did not grow bitter. It is not the way he had ever been. He had been hard on himself and kind to others, and the shape of the cold had not changed that. He had had to practice being kind to himself. The cold helped. It made everything simple. It put all his sorrows in a row and asked him to name them, and when he had named them aloud, they were smaller. He did not forgive the cold. The cold had not asked to be forgiven. It was not a sin, it was a weather. Ghost grew old with him, and then Ghost did not. Dogs and wolves and men have different rules about years. One spring the white wolf leaped down from the wall to chase a hare that deserved it, and he never leaped back up. Men saw him sometimes after that, moving north like a storm that had chosen to be a solitary creature. Once, on a night when the aurora shook across the sky like a bright horse shaking sleet from its mane, a white shape came and sat below the wall in the exact middle and lifted its head and howled a howl that lasted and unbent the spines of men all the way to the shadow tower. Tasted like good air after too much ale. Then it was gone. No one cried. All crying had been done. Everyone went home and took the kind of sleep that makes men more generous in the morning. The last challenge came from the south, as it always must, because men cannot leave a door alone. A sect of monks in red who had forgotten as much as they had learned decided that if the wall were the breath of a man, it should be made to breathe differently. They came with torches and songs and the kind of faith that poisons itself when it is not understood, and they lit the torches against the ice and tried to teach it to sweat. John breathed and the flame did not go out. He did not undo what they were, he merely disagreed with it. And after a time a man even in faith will blow on his hands and look about as if someone will be so kind as to admire his bravery. The red men left, not because they believed less, but because they had found another story to believe in more the next year. That is the way with people. John did not resent it. He kept the shape of their fervor in a small place where it would do no harm and perhaps some good. Energy is useful if you do not let it crash into the wrong door. So years went slow and right. If ever there was a season of starving, it was small, because in the north men had learned to shore up each other like stones in an old wall that has outlived its first house. When things cracked, there was always a little kindness to put its finger in the gap. The south made noise and put on plays, and sometimes men from the north went to see them and frowned and laughed all at once. The plays forgot the names of the people, and there is nothing wrong with that. Names are not the thing. The breath is. In a very late year, when orange leaves blew down in a gust from trees that had decided to try being beautiful one more time before learning the winter entirely, a woman came up the steps with a boy who had been the particular dog of death for some months. He was die-thin and whistle-pale. He had the look of a boy who had decided early to be a good sport about it because his mother deserved someone polite. She was not his mother, but she might as well have been, and that was the noblest story there is when it is true. She brought him to the top and set him gently against the wall like a thing she had made with her hands and wanted the world to see. She put his palm to the ice and he hissed because the first touch always asks a price. "Does it speak?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "It speaks to you? To anyone it has business with. What if I have no business? You have hands." She smiled. "That is business enough." He stood a long time. John watched him. The breath that keeps doors does not pick and choose, but sometimes it admires. When the boy turned away, something had been put into him. Something had come out. It was hard to tell which, and that was the neatness of it. As they left, the boy looked up and spoke not to the woman, but to the air, which is the bravest thing a boy can do if no one has taught him to pray properly. "Are you the king of night?" he asked. There was no fear in it. The air did not move, but the cold turned its head, if cold can be said to have a head. The breath went out of the wall and into the boy's lungs with an ease that will save a boy a life's worth of work. The boy smiled and did not die that winter. He died many winters later the normal way. the way that pleases men who have laid stones and slept in their houses and paid debts and forgiven people who did not deserve it and hurt small people 1 or 2 times and later spent a long season trying to make up for it. It is the only story worthy of the name life. The wall kept breathing through it. The door kept thinking of hinges. There came an old day that felt like a new one when men with more money than gratitude rode up and held a banquet beneath the wall and told each other stories about how their fathers had built it and their grandfathers had held it and how their sons would improve it. They drank and laughed and pissed against the stones at the bottom and sang a little. And if the wall had been a man, it would have been bored. And if it had been a woman, it would have made them cold out of justice. It was a breath. It breathed. At the end, when the wine had run out into the ground and the candles had been swallowed whole by the darkness, they lifted their cups and said to the Night King, because men love to name their protectors with little jokes, the way a boy calls a great bull Buttercup to show he does not fear it. The air, if you had put your ear to it, would have carried a sound like a one-syllable word that means I am here. That was enough. Men slept. The cold lay down outside like a big dog who will not come in but will stay near the door anyway. At last, the day came when men stopped telling the story right. It had been too many years. They forgot. Forgetting is not a sin. It is the world's way of making room for more life. They said once there was a king in darkness who wanted to eat their children. They said once there had been a man who put him down and took his place and stared out over a frostless plain forever. They said the wall had been made by giants. They said it had been made by dragons. They said it had been made by wizards who loved no one and nothing. They said it had been made by a man whose sister was a queen with hair like snow and blood like the sun. They were not right and they were not wrong in any useful way. They were singing. That is an indecently respectable thing to do. What remained true was the cold, and the door and the breath. The wall stood. The wall healed. The wall let. In the middle of a night that happened when no one was looking and thus counts as sacred, a white shape walked from one end of the wall to the other the way a man checks the latch on a gate before sleep. It made no sound. It did not bow to anyone. It paused once at the top of the stair above the black gate and turned its head as if to listen for a laugh it had enjoyed many winters ago. Then it went on, and the sky above it shivered with green and blue and delicate purple that makes strong men affectionate. In a city far south, a woman woke and thought of her brother, and she could not remember his face, and she smiled anyway and slept again, having done a small thing bravely. They asked John what he was. He did not answer because he had learned there are questions that fall apart when you touch them. He breathed. He kept his hands open. If a crow came and settled on his arm, he let it sit. If a boy ran his hand along the ice and cried at the cold, he let him cry. If a woman asked why a door should close even when a person asks it politely to open, he showed her the hinge. He did not teach much. He did not rule. He stood in a place where standing had always been the thing that saved everyone. The old name, the Hungry One, went on being hungry. That is what it does. It pressed sometimes, with its face against the window, and it peered in at the small lights and the ungraceful things men call love when they are too proud to call anything love. Tried the latch and found it holding. It circled the house and found no weakness. It sat down and waited. It had forever. The breath had forever. The breath did know. Tea grow tired. It learned to make its boredom into a kind of quiet art. From the south, a child with the blood of 1,000 small lives, born of a fishmonger and a seamstress who both carried themselves like kings in their own kitchens, wrote a line in her slate. The door is a promise, not a wall. She did not know why she wrote it, and when her schoolmaster asked what she meant, she said she was thinking of jam jars, but her hand had done a bigger thing. The schoolmaster took the slate and wrote it in his book and came north in his old age, because sometimes a man needs to put his old body in front of a large idea and bow and be done. At a time with no name worth saying aloud, a young man who had never seen snow crossed the whole realm to find the wall, because he wanted to stand before a thing older than his shame. He pressed his palms to it, and his shame stood still as a punished dog, and he put his forehead down, and the ice did not burn him. He spoke into it as if to a priest, and he asked for forgiveness from a thing that had no interest in giving or withholding. He felt ridiculous, and he felt clean, and he laughed. The laugh went into the ice and came out warmer, and he stepped back, and it kept him upright for the rest of his small life. He told his own children nothing about it because he had learned that a secret can be better than a memory. And when the time came, as it will come for each of us, and the breath that had kept doors had breathed for so many years that numbers, which are good servants but not kings, had given up, when the cold at last remembered none of the names and could only say hunger without taste, when the South had become another story, when children no longer even believed in winters that lasted past a spring, he stood. He breathed. He answered the same old questions. He kept one world from eating another. If anyone had asked him whether he regretted it, he would have said, if he spoke at all, that it had been his choice and thus a good one, that it was not the kind of story where regret is interesting. If anyone had asked him whether he was king, he might have smiled a little and said he was a man with a job. Sometimes, when you put your ear to the wall, you can hear, very far away and yet inside you, the sound of a man and a woman arguing in the gentle way families do when they do not want to wake the children. A man saying the door must stay shut tonight, and the woman saying the milk will spoil if it does not have a little air, and the man laughing and saying very well but stand there to watch it, and she saying I plan to, and he saying I know. If you know that sound, you will sleep well. If you do not, it is no shame. There are other sounds for other hearts. The wall stands. It is sealed forever, which is another way of saying it is kept. There are lights in the windows of human houses. Things scrape at those windows sometimes and are not let in. The sky above goes about its business with admirable discipline. The land north waits like a wilderness between bones, and it is loved by things with their own stories and their own kings. The quiet where the great breach had been is so complete that men who have learned to be suspicious of quiet have to walk away and laugh at themselves and return as if the quiet were a guest at table who has something half great to say and will say it after one more sip of wine. Ghost grins at the moon wherever he is, and it grins back. The children of men sleep through winter nights without counting their breath. And the man at the wall, who was a boy, who was a name, who was forgotten and remembered and never owned and never asked to be, breathes. He breathes until breath becomes the only sensible verb. He is there and therefore the door holds. That is the whole trick. That is the sum of the story. In a world of kings and little traffic and griefs that stain or shine depending on the cloth, he is the breath that the cold must reckon with, and because he stands and never asks for more and never offers less, the wall, white, blue, bone bright, never opens to the wrong name. When word of Sansa's going spread as all such words do, through kitchens first, then drill yards, then the slow echo the gods would takes down into its roots. Men and women went about their tasks quieter for a time and then, like the sensible creatures they are, louder, because noise is a thing people make to keep against silence that would swallow them. Winterfell's halls were full that season. There were women who had slept in barns for a decade who found themselves startled by sheets. A lordling who had never nailed a roof learned to swing a hammer and not to look at his hands after the first blister. The old maester with the soft voice sent boys north with bottles stoppered tight, the bottles filled with nothing more than clean air taken from the weirwood grove, and he wrote in a neat hand, a gift for the brother. The boys were told to lay the bottles against the wall and let them go. Some thought it a fool's errand and some loved it as the most serious work they'd ever been given. The wall, for its part, made room for these small ceremonies. It has always been the way of great things to find patience for little kindness. Arya came back at last on a ship that did not look like ships men in the narrow sea would call proper. It had lines like the bones of a fish, and a sail dyed a blue so deep that men who'd never seen the river at dusk cursed and called it black. She stood at the prow without cloak or hat, and the wind peeled her hair back and found silver in it, as if it had been hiding there to surprise her one day. Her eyes were still the gray of a sky deciding about snow. There were lines around them now that had not been there when she had sailed west, because every life wears its own weather. She had maps with her, folded into a leather case that looked like a wounded bird because it had been loved hard, and the maps were of places that did not have names here and places that did but were drawn wrong on every wise man's wall. She came to Winterfell not as a lady but as a guest who would never ask for bread twice. They brought her to the great hall, and she put her hand on the old stone and closed her eyes as if listening to the conversation of the house. She smiled without showing teeth, which was always when Arya's smiles meant most. And then she went to the godswood. Before the red leaves she stood, and the tree, who remembers what it is paid to remember, showed her back a face that was a little girl's and a woman's like frost over a stream. She said nothing aloud, because she had learned that not every feeling is improved by words. She tied a black thread around a low bough and went out into the yard to find horses, because there is only one road that mattered to her after all the roads. The men at Castle Black did not know her. They saw a lean woman with a sword at her hip and a knife at her boot and a hunger in her movement that was not for food. And they made the mistake all men make when they think they see the end of a story at the gate. But the wolves in the north know their own, and the ravens came and arranged themselves in neat rows along the roof beam, and the wall did a thing it almost never does. It sent a quiver down into the stones of the yard like the laughter of an old friend heard in another room. The steward, a woman now from Barrowton, hair plaited as tight as a rope, stepped forward and bowed the right way, not too low, not too much ceremony, as if they were both keeping the secret of a good joke. Arya did not go inside. She stood with her palms on the ice. When the cold bit, she set her teeth and let it. She had been many names and none, and learned the trick of walking behind her own shadow so that she could see it clean. She felt the breath come up into her bones, and it tasted the way a winter morning smells when a girl goes out with a bow before breakfast to see if the deer are foolish. Then she stepped back and looked up at the pale shoulders of the wall, and she said, "To it and through it." I didn't like goodbyes then. I like them less now. The answer she got was not a word. The air leaned closer as if to hear a thing that was already being said. Down along the ipsy of the ice, a slow shimmer moved as moonlight on the skin of deep water. Her hands thawed without fire. She laughed. It was a sound like a child running through snow and a woman sliding a knife into a sheath at the same time. She would tell no one about that laugh. She kept it. She went beyond the gate at dusk, because that was when she had first learned to become a thing other than a girl who had too many older voices telling her what to be. The shadow of the wall lay long, a blue so dark it made black look bright. She walked until the cold decided not to test her today. In a little hollow where drifted snow looked like sleeping beasts, she stopped and knelt and pressed her palm flat. The ground there had remembered that once a girl had knelt with a sword heavier than she was supposed to lift and said a list of names until she could say them without hurting herself. "I didn't forget them," Arya told the ground. "I simply put them away." A white shape came up the hollow and stopped. She had no fear left in her. It had all been used in the proper places. She put out her hand and the white wolf came and pressed his face under it. The old scars along his muzzle were smoother. His eyes were deep as snow-lit midnight. He smelled of cold water and stubbornness. "Ghost," she said, and he licked her wrist. For a very long time she was a girl in the snow with a wolf. She told him a few things that would have bored a human. He told her nothing, but he kept her there, anchored, exactly as long as she needed to be anchored. When she rose, she touched her brow in his, and then she walked back and Ghost went north as if he were following a song only he could hear. In the morning she went up to the top of the wall and stood beside the place where boys had once played with fear to make it smaller. She did not press her ear to the ice. She did not need to. "I saw a sea that cracks and steams," she said. "I saw a fish that glowed like a coal and tasted like the best lie a friend ever told you. I saw a shore that rubs itself away every night and returns every morning, and men who think they are the ones to decide and women who are the ones who actually decide, and a child who built a small castle out of sticks and called it home and meant it. I saw a storm with bones." The breath in the ice listened. She spoke names. Her father's first, then a list, not of her old grudge but of all the little names she had kept safe because someone had to. Printers and washerwomen, and a boy who had died for a horse, and a woman who had killed a lord because the lord had thought she wouldn't. They were small, important names. She knew better than to waste such a listening with large, useless ones. When she was done, she said, "I am going to go somewhere no one believes there is." She smiled up at the ice as if it were a tall brother trying not to laugh. "Try to stop me." The air settled on her shoulders, light as linen. It had the taste of apples that had been kept well. It told her nothing except that the door was shut and would open when it should, which was all she had ever wanted of doors. She went away south and west, and later there were songs that got her wrong on purpose, and she enjoyed them more for it. She would come back again in a gray year with a limp and a map folded small to fit in a locket, and she would whisper a thing only the ice could keep without deforming. After that, she did not come back again. Or perhaps she did, and the wall, as it always must, did not betray her to anyone. Tormund's last day was a clear one. He had grown smaller by the trick men used to leave the world without scaring people. He had made parts of himself less loud and more particular. His beard was whiter than the cliffs at the sea's edge and as full as old pride. He insisted on dying outside. His people had built a bier with ropes braided by hands that had learned rope from an age when rope decided the difference between living and dying. He lay with one hand on his belly and one hand open. Around him stood women and men who owed him more than they could say without making the thing foolish, so they did not say it. They set fire to him and he burned, and the smoke went straight up because the air agreed this one time to be reasonable. Jon stood on the wall with his open eyes and his closed ones and remembered Tormund laughing so hard he fell backward into snow. He remembered a man who had taught a boy that not everything is a bargain, and the best things are a bargain you don't realize you made until the day you count your small spoons and discover you have enough. As the smoke rose, something in the north answered it. Not a scream or a bow. Not a sign from a god men pray to because they want certainty in matters that were never meant to be certain. It was a small shift in the weight of the world, as if a chair had been pushed back from a table and a man had gotten up and gone to piss in the snow and laughed and returned. The free folk told their stories, and some said they saw the white wolf walk through the smoke, and some said they smelled pears, which Tormund had once sworn were a lie southern trees tell, and all of them drank later and told the stories again even better. The watch changed quietly. It had to. The boys in black became men in gray and women in blue and sometimes a girl in a green cloak, and no one minded the colors because the cold does not consult a uniform. They were not soldiers as much as weathersmiths, stewards of the hinge, readers of breath. They kept ledgers where the columns were names and also days of fog and the tastes of winds. A woman from Skagos taught them how to listen by putting their teeth together and hearing the difference the skull makes when air turns on itself. A mason from White Harbor brought a new way to set stones that did not argue with ice as much as say please and thank you to it. They learned to make lamps that burned whale oil without smoking so badly that it turned lungs to leather by 40. They discovered that if you sang a certain way in the long stair, the note would carry the whole length and tell the guards on top what weather to expect. They kept the old oaths where they were still useful and wrote new ones in the margins, and, when those proved themselves, carefully copied them over into the book as if the book itself might be nervous of newness if it was not dressed like tradition. A boy from the Tor who had been named Jaren and had gone north hungry for wonder grew into a man with hands like knots in hard rope. He came to the watch and laughed at the work and did it well, which is to say he was surprised every day and yet rarely took that surprise to mean he should stop. He married a woman who could read a cloud's secrets better than a maester reads law, and together they built small things that made the big thing easier. Wooden wedges that persuaded ice to sit differently, canvas sleeves that broke a north wind's knives, a way to harvest cold where it was thickest and save it in cellars for summers when men forgot to be respectful. He told no one about the figure in the field of ice he had seen as a boy. It had been a private kindness, and he kept it like a coin with a hole drilled through it and the cord worn smooth by years. The South made trouble because it cannot breathe unless its own throat is sore. In a city of marble weirtides are politeness practiced on water. A council decided that the land called the New Gift and the Old should be parceled to men whose letters they had liked. The letters were elegant. They came with gold. The decision went out like a fat man's cough, unpleasant to listen to and hard to dislodge. A caravan came north with banners that showed fat grapes and bulls and roses so delicate everyone who saw the banners laughed without meaning to. They camped at Queen's Crown and found the ground insistent, the wind impolite, the ponds haunted by frogs who spoke ill of people in general. When the men with the letters came to the gate at Castle Black with their smiles like knives pressed flat to their tongues, the steward in the tight plates met them and offered them soup first, because a northern woman will always feed trouble as a way to make it human enough to beat. "Who signs your paper?" she asked the leader after he had wiped his mouth and pretended not to love the soup. "The hand," he said, which is to say no one, and then added a name which would have mattered to a court bard and did not matter to the wind. "It is the king's will. You have brought the king into a conversation he did not need to be part of," the steward said. "The king's will ends where keeping breath begins. The gift is a hinge. You cannot carve a hinge to suit every new door. You can polish it. You can oil it. You cannot cut it to shape with a page. The man laughed the laugh of a southerner who believes he is being insulted in a way too country for his wit to register. He put his paper on the table. The ink looked very fine. It was like armor oil on a new blade. "Lay your hands on the wall," Jaron said, his voice low as a fire at the end of a long night. He had once learned to make anger into a little bowl that did not spill even when a man kicked it. "If it agrees with you, build your barns. If it does not, turn your mules." The men put their hands on the wall and yelped. It was not the pain. It was the sudden knowledge in their bones that they were not in a place that would care whether a man's grandfather had bought a town. They turned their mules. The paper found its way into a barrel the next week, and someone used the ember to light a pipe and say a small prayer to a God who likes the smell of good leaf. In the South, the council met again and said very little and wrote no new letters for a season. It is possible that someone wise was in the room. It is possible someone was merely tired. The effect is the same, and we will take it. A new maester came with a chain that clicked modestly and a face with one of those mouths that always looks like it's about to say sorry. She was young and built like a sapling in wind. She had hands that could thread a needle by candle. She stood at the base of the wall and cried once without hiding it, and then set to work without making a speech about it. She wrote a small book that said, "The door's breath seems to remember grief better than joy, and sometimes that is how we get through winter." She brewed drafts that slept boys with broken ribs without taking their breath from them. She invented a very elegant syllable to denote the specific blue of the ice at mid-afternoon in high winter, and never told anyone because some words are better as gifts than currency. On a fog year when the sea at Eastwatch grew teeth and took bites at the shore as if tasting the stone for salt, something came riding in the fog that men did not see so much as swear had to be there for the sake of sense. Nets came up screaming. The fishers would not row beyond the line where the fog licked at the boat's gunnels. A sound carried through white air, deep, as if a man had dropped a stone down a well that had never wanted to tell you how deep it was and now had decided to show off. A shape galloped beneath the water, too close to the surface for regret. Around the same time, a girl at last hearth woke screaming and could not say why, and a shepherd just inland from the bite of the shivering sea saw his sheep kneel all together in the same patch of sun. John went to the edge between fog and breath and stood. He knew heat, cold, wind, stillness. The sound was something else. He let it come into him and spread through his blood as if it were learning his house for later. It was not hunger and not joy, but something like a third cousin to both. Pushed. He did not push back. He widened the way a man will widen his stance to take a blow he has trained his ribs to listen through. The fog slid over him and realized it could not map him and moved on. Disgruntled like a cat turned out of a warm bed by a small girl. The shape in the fog hesitated, broke apart, and reformed. It wanted something. That was the worst part. He could not tell what and refused to guess, because guessing at a stranger's hunger is a way to turn yourself into kitchen scraps. He breathed out, the long, steady exhale that carries a house into night, and the fog lost its rehearsal and peeled away, and the sea went back to being a wet, foolish loudness. Later, people said a great fish had rolled, silver as bells, belly to the sky, but when they went out in boats to find it, they found only a water calm enough to taste boring. The girl at last hearth slept through till noon the next day and was cross because she missed breakfast. Years thin and years thick, and in a thick one a dragon came. That is how the tale is told by whoever tells it, and who am I, who likes a true story as much as a good one, to object? If it was a dragon, it had been a long time since any had flown over the north. If it was not, it wore the shape well enough for songs. Men heard it first. A rush and a thrum that went into their bones and made their bodies think of running even when their heads explained that winter ground breaks ankles. It came from the east, low, so that it seemed to no men had fields to talk to first, and then it rose, slow and deliberate, like an argument that is too good to be answered. It came to the wall and turned its head like a skeptical queen at a tournament. Its eyes were not the round, hot eyes of something merely fond of fire. They were old, irregular, a shape riotous with the memory of names. It blew not flame but something like a breath of its own, and steam rose where it licked the ice. The watch stood and did not shoot it with crossbow or prayer. They had plenty of both. The steward went up on the parapet and called in her common voice, as if calling to a neighbor at the next field. "You're late," she said without malice. It canted its head, and there was a moment when anyone with a sentimental soul would have said it smiled. Came closer. The air went hot. Men's eyebrows curled. A pot left on a brazier hissed itself empty. John breathed in. He did not offer the cold like a gauntlet. He offered it like a hand. The heat met the cold and neither broke. The dragon, or the thing that was convenient to call dragon, rumbled down in its long belly the way a father might when a very small boy has finally stopped crying. Put one claw against the ice, pressed, and left no mark. It looked at the white shape that had come to stand a little way down the wall, Ghost, who had returned for reasons of his own and stood now as if his whole life had been the waiting for this 1 minute. They regarded each other, and in that regard the world held. There was no dominance in it, no pact, nothing theatrical, only two creatures with their own long stories acknowledging that neither had any use for the other's house. The dragon lifted one wing. Not a salute, not a threat, a stretch, and tilted away and went east, slow as a boat when the wind is enough but not generous. Men talked about it for a decade, and then it became part of the sort of prayer men say over a child who has been named and has looked up and blinked. The children of the forest did not come as people think. No procession, no ceremony, no emergence from trunks like a song turned to flesh. A single small one came and stood at the edge of a stand of pines near the frosted stones of a watch platform and watched the men watching the sky for weather they could not yet feel. He stood until someone saw her, and then longer until someone saw properly, not with the part of the eye that records and forgets, but with the part that brings a thing in and lets it live. Jaren went to her because Jaren had learned to speak to trees, not as Bran had, with names and flight, but with willingness to wait. He held out his hands, palms up, and then lowered them again like a man offering bread and deciding to keep it warm a little while longer. "You know us?" the child said, and her voice was like water one day from freezing, the day it likes best. "We know what we can," Jaren said. "The rest we keep out of harm's way by not pretending." She cocked her head and smiled in a way that made men want to stand straighter. "You kept the door," she said to the air, and the air made room for the words to pass. "We made it. It is not shame to say a thing we made forgot itself. We wondered what you would be when you were made. We did not think it would be this." "It is a man," Jaren said quietly, and the child nodded. "A man whose heart is a hand on a hinge," she said approvingly. "We do not apologize for what we did. We are sorry for what we did not foresee. It is not the same thing, but it will do." "What do you want?" Jaren asked, cautious the way a father is cautious when a stranger asks after his child. "To see," she said. "We do not like to take more than we bring. We have brought a thing to see." She held out a nut the size of a man's little fingernail, dull brown and unassuming. "Plant it where he breathes the strongest. Do not plant it in ceremony. Plant it on a day a boy has broken a bone and a woman has laughed so hard she is ashamed and a man is too tired to make a speech. Plant it quietly. The tree will know what to do. If it lives, do not ask it to do tricks." Jaren took the nut. It was cold, and then it was not. He tucked it in the pocket where his wife had once stitched a little blue bird and then unstitched it, explaining that a man does not need color to know where he has put something. Months later, when a storm had blown horses' manes into knots and a boy had fallen from a sill and snapped his collarbone and a woman had laughed herself sick when the stew pot lid leapt because she had forgotten steam, Jaren walked up the long stair alone and went out into a wind that did not pick fights and pressed the nut into a seam in the ice where melt took its time. He did not say anything. He did not make a bargain. He went down again and told no one. In spring, a pale sprig appeared, color of old milk. Men asked if they should tend it and were told by the steward, "If a thing wants to live here, it will live. If it does not, no tender hand will persuade it." The sprig grew with the stubbornness of a rumor that happens to be true. It became not a tree but a thorn bush, hard and dear, with leaves like the tongues of little birds. In high summer, it put out a single white flower with 5 petals like a hand, and men came up and looked at it and did not touch it, which tells you that even people who pretend not to understand worship know when to behave. Men came north for other reasons, as they always must. Some because they had a kind of shame they could not put in a truer place. Some because a woman they loved liked the taste of the air. Some because they had no talent for the South's kind of lie. A singer came who had made a decent living in Gulltown by writing songs that could be sung dishonestly and still feel pleasant. He climbed the steps because he had been dared and because he thought perhaps he would write a song about the breath and make himself famous for a decade, and the idea had drunk at him. At the top, he put his ear down and pressed so hard he left a little skin. He listened and then he got up and stood back and laughed, embarrassed and happy like a man who has suddenly realized he has been calling his wife by a nickname she hates and has never noticed because she loves him. He did not write a song. He wrote a garden. He went home to a small town near the Sweetwater and married a woman who had once been told she was too plain to love by a boy, who later cried into his beer at a tavern because his wife was beautiful and had never learned to be kind. And this singer and this plain woman planted onions and sang to them, and the onions did as they were told. He sang to his daughters and they cried and then said they had something in their eyes and then laughed because they were their father's girls. It is possible this garden saved more lives in a hard winter than all the songs about kings ever did. Sometime around the year when everyone remembered the night, a comet fell over the Bight and turned the sea into a flat of hammered copper. A priest of the seven came with a clean robe and a clenched mouth. He had a face like a shuttered window and the sort of hands that can bless or slap with equal confidence. He said he brought offerings. He brought little idols of the mother and the smith and candles that smoked like ill-kept chimneys. He set them up on a small table and asked for time to preach. And the steward said, "You may say your piece, but say it as if you are speaking at a fire where a tired man is trying to sleep." And he blinked as if he had not expected to be told the truth about himself, and then bowed in the way of a man who can be taught. He preached a short sermon about doors. It was not a bad one. He spoke of the stranger and the father, and he did not threaten boys with hell. He asked the breath to bless marriages as if the breath were someone's aunt. He burned his candles, and they guttered and smoked and smelled of cheap tallow. The men of the watch coughed and rolled their eyes. He laughed at himself and blew them out and apologized. He slept wrapped up like a man in a sack, and in the morning he put his hand on the wall and did not yelp the way the lettered man had done. He whispered something to it, perhaps a confession, perhaps a joke. When he left, he took his idols. The next winter, when a fever laid hands on him in a village that had no maester, he told the people to take the shutters off the windows because sometimes air is as holy as a prayer, and the village lived through it. He never came back. He did not need to. He had taken the useful part. Time is a lake that keeps throwing up old bones. The name of the man who had been king then, and the woman some called queen, and the boy who wore a crown too heavy, and a girl who wore crowns made of laughter. Their names turned to silt. The stories hardened in places and washed away in others. The hinge held. A woman born after the ceiling found she had a gift for standing in one place and seeing the weather walking out of the north like a line of men coming back from a fight. She gave the watch a day's grace when it mattered. A man who had never loved anything bigger than a door learned to love the entire wall at once and died contented and irritable, which is the best a lot of us can aim at. A boy named for no one in particular walked the long stair and fell in love with counting and spent 20 years counting the steps so that others would not have to when the steepness bit them. He wrote his numbers in a little book and put it in a box, and the box in another, and men still cursed his neatness and used his work. There were failures. There were men who drank too much and called it piety because they did it out in the snow where no one could judge them. There were women who lied to keep a girl from leaving, and that lie grew moss and rot. There was a watchman who wanted to be the shape of a tail and not the marrow of one. He tried to open the door as a gesture, and the breath gave him such a stillness that he finally saw himself plain. And he spent the rest of his years keeping small doors for old women, and that was better than any one big door he could have fumbled with. There was a storm that took a tower, and men rebuilt it and made it uglier and stronger, and then later prettier and a little weaker, and then at last right, which is the way with towers and families. John never forgot heat. It is necessary to say that. He did not become a statue. He liked the thought of a hand close to a brazier. He liked the thought of a pot of stew simmering with its lid slightly ajar to let story out. He liked the sour sweet of wine caught between teeth. He liked the sound wood makes under an axe when it consents. He liked a woman's voice when she is not trying to be heard by anyone but one person. He had his days of ache. On such days the world was loud or thin, and many thoughts tried to be important all at once. He had learned to call those thoughts by their proper names and ask them to wait their turn. He had learned that he was not required to be bored, only steady. He read, in a manner of speaking. He let Sam's old pages blow across his mind and he gathered them up. He let Tyrion's name flutter through with a grin attached. If Tyrion lived or died or learned to die with jokes, those were matters for Tyrion and the South. But the grin was the right piece to keep. He let Daenerys' name be a sound like wind over stone, not forgetting nor remembering too much. You cannot expect a good story to fit into a door. He let his father's voice be a warmth and his mother's a cold clarity and did not demand they share space. He talked sometimes to the thorn bush. It did not answer in any way a man can tell. Once it pricked his finger and he bled and the blood froze to a beautiful bead and he laughed and flicked it away, which is what life deserves sometimes. One year, a caravan of Ironborn came overland without raiding, and this was itself a marvel. They carried fish the size of unborn calves, salted hard and smelling like the part of a tail the singers shorten. They came to trade and to prove something no one had asked them to prove, because this is the Ironborn way. They stood under the wall and shouted their names and said that if gods were still in the world they had sailed with them on seas that do not agree to be charted. The steward came and pointed at their fish and asked what they wanted in exchange. They wanted stories more than salt, though salt was welcome. Stories they could bring home and pretend they had lived, as all men do. The Watch gave them stories that were neither too large to swallow nor too small to be worth chewing. The Ironborn went away cranky and satisfied. In Pike, an old man with a beard like moss told a story to 3 children about a wall that sings and a king who won't take anyone's crown. And the children grew up as well as Ironborn can, and one of them decided to plant potatoes on a cliff and not die. And this is also the way a wall keeps a promise. It is necessary to say too that the South prospered and failed and prospered. The wall is not the cause of everything. It is a border, not a puppet string. Kings ruled and died and were understood and misunderstood. A woman in Old Town taught girls to carve their own names into the backs of chairs, and no one stopped her. A man in King's Landing invented a device to lessen smoke in kitchens, and was thanked by 3 queens and slapped by his wife for forgetting their daughter's name on a birthday. Wars were small and then not and then small again. Plague came and was coaxed back into its corner with cleanliness and lies and a song children were afraid to sing properly. The wall held. It was not always inspiration. Sometimes it was merely the thing that could be relied on to be the same on days when every other fool thing was changing. There was late, a whisper in the breath that those with a taste for such things heard and those without did not. It was not a warning. It was the opposite. It was a notice pinned to a door that said, "I am here." Came on nights when the aurora ran like green fish. It came on days when the sun set without clouds and left the world feeling politely unfinished. T said nothing more than the fact of a man being in place. Some heard it as a comfort. Some were annoyed by it the way a man is annoyed by the clock when he is trying to make a case for sleeping through his responsibilities. It did not care either way. It would be there when the boy grew into a man who paid his debts, and when the woman took the long road around the marsh because she had learned not to trust quick ways. It would be there on the day light came late and on the day it came early. It was there as if it had never considered any other choice. A very old man came up the long stair with inordinate dignity. He had been handsome when he was young, and it had made him careful of mirrors in his age. He had a cane he used as if to reassure the stair it was doing its job. The steward offered him a rest, and he refused in the manner of men who take pride from refusal, which is not a virtue but is not the worst of our vices. At the top he set his palm to the ice and closed his eyes and then opened them quickly with a little jerk because he had bitten his own tongue with surprise. He stared at his hand as if it had misbehaved. "I thought," he said aloud to nobody he could see, "that I would say, 'I forgive you,' and then I would be forgiven." He laughed once, dry. But that is not the way. No one answered him, and he did not require it. He took his hand away and sat on the bench and watched a raven walk the parapet with the important ridiculousness of a small creature who believes itself a priest. He laughed again, softer. When he went down the stair, he went slowly. At the bottom he thanked the steward for the rest he had not accepted, which is a kind of grace and should be rewarded where it occurs. He died a summer later. His sons said he had become gentle at the end. His wife, who had never liked the word gentle when applied to her husband, said he had become honest, and both were true enough. In the end that is not an end, in a spring that tried to be as clean as a newborn's breath and almost managed it, a child born with a hand that would not unclench came up from Molestown with her grandmother. She had hair like straw in shadow and eyes fierce as nails. The old woman said she had brought the girl because no midwife could ease her hand and no herb had convinced it to leave its fist. The steward nodded and said not much, because there is no harm in letting another thing do the talking in such cases. They went up. The grandmother wheezed like a branch in winter. The girl stared at her hand as if thinking to punch it open. At the top, she put her knuckles to the ice almost by accident, and the skin of her palm went hot and then cold, and then she squealed because the hand opened. It did not open like a rose in a story. It opened like a stubborn door finally being shown where the hinge was. She looked at her fingers as if they were small fish she had caught with cleverness, and her grandmother cried, as grandmothers are entitled to do when the world does them the favor of being both simple and kind, and then laughed because the world is rarely both. They went down and the girl kept opening and closing the hand as if she did not intend to let it learn bad habits ever again. If you go to the wall now, if you take your time and let it take its time with you, if you put your ear to it and are foolish enough to expect genius, you may be disappointed. The genius is in the ordinary. You will hear, if you are the sort who hears, a long breath going out and a long breath coming in. You will hear, if you are fanciful, the sound of ropes being coiled and uncoiled. You will hear, if you are perverse, nothing at all, and will tell yourself a boring story about how there was never magic, only men and women with more nerve than sense. If you are very lucky, you will stand where a girl from the West and a boy from the Tor and a man from White Harbor and a woman from Skagos and a wolf from beyond and a dragon from the edge of color all stood, and you will feel yourself broaden. You will find that you can hold more than you thought without dropping any of it. The way a mother can carry a baby and a loaf and a pot wrapped in a towel and a knife with the blade pointed away without making a speech about how hard it is. You will take your hand away and it will be your hand, and the scar on it from a clumsy adolescent moment with a fishhook will still be there, and you will love the scar in a way that does not require you to lie about how much it hurt when you got it. If you are unlucky, you will try to own what you felt. You will go south and say, I have a claim to this land. Men will laugh at you because claims are the South's real weather and yours is not fashionable. You will grow old and grumpy, and one day some child will put a flower in your beard, and you will find that this is also a way of keeping a door. You will die later than you might have had you never put your ear to anything larger than yourself. And if that is not the work of gods, then gods are missing a trick. The wall breathes. The breath is a man. He is not lonely because he chose this, and choice is the only company worth bringing to such a vigil. He is not miserable because misery is a form of vanity, and he was never vain enough for it. Not even when he was young and a friend told him he had the best scowl in the north and he almost smiled. He is not happy either. That is not the point. He is the point, like a hinge is the point of a door. The cold comes like a hungry guest thinking to enter without knocking and finds itself outside looking at a latch it has always disliked. The heat comes like a cousin with too much wine thinking to walk through the kitchen, and his aunt catches him by the ear and tells him he can come in only if he wipes his boots. The fog remembers manners. The wind forgets and then is reminded. The men and women on the wall and south of it, and those north who have no interest in being shepherded, but appreciate the fence when it keeps wolves off their heels. They go on, stubbornly, kindly, badly, bravely. On the day you read this, if reading is the way you take your meanings, and if it is not, then on the day you go up the stairs and learn the size of your breath, the thorn bush might have another flower. Or not. The flower does not make the thorn true. The thorn does not make the flower real. Both together are better. The ice is up there being less wall than promise. If you put your ear to it and hear a soft cough, that is only a man reminding the world to be on its best behavior. And if you hear nothing, that is only the world remembering it already knew how. If you are walking away and you feel, at your back, the lightest touch, a mother's palm making sure a child has his cloak closed, do not turn. It is not a trick. It is not a ghost. It is the breath that you have been breathing this whole time. The one that keeps fires where fires belong and frost where frost is most useful. Keep walking. The door will be there when you return. It will be shut in the right way and open in the right way. It will let you in. It will keep the bad thing out, even when the bad thing is something you long for because you do not yet know its right name. Beyond the wall, where the aurora steps like a dancer learning and relearning a pattern that carries over centuries and routines, Ghost runs. His paw prints fill with a little light for a little while and then close over. He is not a sign. He is a wolf. He is a perfect thing doing the thing it was made to do. Sometimes he lifts his head and howls, and sometimes he does not. Sometimes, when the cold gets ideas, he stalks it as if it were a rabbit made foolish by its own games. He will never be caught and he will never catch, because some chases are their own purpose and the point of a path is that it goes, not that it ends. In the far distance there is a cliff where waves throw up glass some mornings and birds fight each other for it to build nests that catch light. And there is a lichen that tastes like salt and iron if you are the sort to taste. A bear sleeps somewhere that men have no words for. Snow falls in the manner of a curtain drawn by a tired actor. The breath keeps time. The hinge does not creak. The door does not fail. If there is ever a day when it must open for people who are not yet born and will not understand why a door that loved them resisted them once, it will open. It will do so without drama. John will breathe out. The house will breathe in. The tide will take and give. Men will do what they have always done. Make do with bad tools and improve them and call that improvement wisdom. Then it will shut again and everyone will say they saw this coming and everyone will be lying. Between now and then there is this steady, ordinary, terrible, beautiful. That will have to be enough. It is more than many worlds get. It is late. The last of the day's light goes soft and then is gone. There is a sound as of a man settling back in a chair he has carved for himself over many years. A chair that knows him and has no interest in eating him. There is a silence like a good woman's patience. There is a cold that allows your breath to smoke and your lungs to fill and your blood to be honest. There is a wall that is not a wall. There is a king who is not a king, and the best part of him is the not. He breathes. The world behaves. The story, bored with endings, refuses to end.